Here's another thing I want to talk about. Jacob Collier, who I think is honestly one of the funniest. Well, he's not intentionally trying to be funny. One of the funnier people in music. Insanely talented dude. I'll put that right out of the bat. He has more talent in his like pinky fingernail than I do in my whole essence. But I
That's
think a lot
not
of his
true.
music is kind of it's music for musicians. That's and I mean that exactly how I said it. So but he talks about this, which I read, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, one of the probably the best, most interesting books, and it reads a lot like a Buddhist philosophy book. It's about how creating, and it's a very helpful frame, especially because I'm working, we're working on Dirtbag Ivy right now. Uh, Dirtbag Ivy being like we're in the seed phase, as he calls it, where we're like planting ideas and seeing which ones kind of like start to sprout something with people. We're not in a phase of like trying to get it out to the masses instantly. We're truly creating it and having fun with this part of it, and that's what it should be. So he talks a lot about that in the book, and he goes on to for the next steps of like once you have enough songs, and this goes for any sort of artistic endeavor. Like the creative act is definitely not just for musicians, but any creative endeavor where you're like, okay, now how do I get to this to the masses? How do I take criticism? It walks you through the steps of creating anything. So he had something interesting to say. Which people are always kind of take whatever Rick Rubin says, and they're like, yeah, that's gospel. That dude worked with, he started off with Beastie Boys. He's worked with Slayer, Kendrick Lamar, so many people. I couldn't even begin to tell all the stuff. But uh, so the thing that Jacob Collier had against um, Rick Rubin is the fundamental truth that there's no one way of doing anything. So that's his main thing because Rick Rubin does definitely says like this is how you do it the best. Um, and he's basically kind of talking about how uh, the audience comes last. Uh, and it's really should just be for yourself. And Rick Rubin also has another thing. He always says, whatever the artistic, whatever idea is artistic, that's the one that's going to work best. That means if a record label's like, no, you need to make this song sound like this, that's not the way to go about it. You're just thinking money and business, which is just going to make a song that sounds like that's all you're trying to do.
It's not very like creative spirit to think of things in a like how is this as a product? You got to think of it more of like the why, what are you creating for the sake of its own creation? Like it's yeah, I don't know. I'll be honest, like I don't know if I've like really loved a lot of like I mean Rick Rubin's like made some great albums, but like I don't know. I'm not sure if I like ever have like some of his albums too have like some interesting like sound choices. I feel like they get really um fuck, what's the word for this? You'll have to edit me remembering compression. Is that they sound like they get really loud and sound kind of tinny.
Yeah, like over compressed. Yeah, loud and lacking dynamics, basically.
Would it be controversial to say that I think he's maybe a little overrated?
That I think that's kind of what Jacob Collier is saying. He says, and I feel deeply as a creative person, I would critique Rick, which a lot of people don't in the music space. I don't believe his audience is creative people. I think his audience is people who aren't creative, for whom creativity is novel. That's that's spicy. That's a that's quite a that's quite a thing to say about
I
like
think I'm Team Jacob
here.
on this one. Um, I feel, I don't know. I mean, I definitely, there's plenty of albums that Rick Rubin has put, have been a part of that I have really enjoyed, but I don't know if that was like because of Rick Rubin or because it was like the Slayer rocks or the Red Hot Chili Peppers are great or,
Yeah, Chili
like
Peppers. Yeah,
Metallica. There's so many Metallica albums I think he did that, I don't know. He let Lars get away with that fucking snare drum on Saint Anger. Like,
see, but
that's
that was his artistic choice, and also like, yeah, you talk shit on that snare drum all you want, but they were going for something.
it's also like the most expensive band, or like they have so much money, so like it's obviously working.
Yeah, I truly do sound it. It does sound like that snare drum is a like somebody just took one of those metal folding chairs and just like hit it, but like got a good slap on it. Sounds like shit. Uh,
I hope that was intentional. Like that Lars Ulrich was like, let's fuck with the fans.
yeah, I mean, kind of going back to that, it's like, for artistic purposes, you never know what's going to land or like what's going to stay in trend for the foreseeable future.
Could you imagine alternate reality where everybody fucking loved that snare sound and that like all music has the Saint Anger drum, just like a whole like world of post
Yeah.
2003. That's the industry standard is that like thud.
Yeah, like back in the 80s where everything had that certain snare drum sound, like the super gated reverb, just the explosion sound, because that you could tell something from the 80s specifically from that sound. But it would be really funny if everything was saying here. But it also does open the door to be like my snare drum or my guitar, anything in the creative process doesn't have to sound like everything. It can sound bad intentionally almost because like there's no way that people were listening to that album when they were creating it and they're like, is that the final version of the drum mix? Is that really what you're going with? Yeah.
I feel like Metallica is probably surrounded by yes men somewhat.
Oh
But like they were also going through some shit when they did that, so maybe they were just like, "Fuck it, who cares?" Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, what was going on at that point?
okay, so funny you ask. There was a little movie about this. It's like a behind the scenes documentary that they made. It was right after Jason Newsted left, the bass player who replaced Cliff in the 90s. If you're not a Metallica fan, their first bass player, Cliff Burton, died in a bus crash while they were touring Master of Puppets, which is pretty sad because like that was also like some of their really, really good albums was like with Cliff. They got Jason Newsted who came in the 90s, who played like on the Black album and like um he was like pretty great, good, powerful backing vocals too. But then he left, I think it was like early 2000s. So Metallica was like looking for a new bass player. James Hetfield was in rehab, like real bad, and like in and out of like drug addiction
What
and
was it? What was
probably
it?
more
Did he get like a
drinking.
cokehead?
I think like alcohol is probably his big thing. I don't know. I know alcohol for sure. Probably some other stuff too.
That's a staple in every addict.
They just
Well,
call
not
him
everyone.
alcoholica.
Yeah, alcoholic. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, Saint Anger was the first thing that they made like after he got out of rehab, and they didn't really have a bass player at that point. Um, I think it might have actually been maybe it was Rick Rubin or somebody in the studio was playing the bass on that who wasn't Rob, who eventually became they picked Rob after they recorded the album, I think. And then he was like the touring bass player. Now he's their guy. I think he's actually been in Metallica the longest bass player, which is
Hmm.
kind of wild.
Yeah, they seem pretty settled in their lineup now. I mean, if they haven't replaced Lars, then I think your job is safe with Metallica.
Yeah.
I think him and the drummer from Black Keys are probably like the biggest drummers that are not good.
I well, Lars is like in actually in that same thing. You see that like Lars's real MVP is like the interpersonal, like
He's like the
he
manager.
yeah, he and like James like fight like really have like creative because like I think you could argue that like James Hetfield's sort of like the creative driving force of Metallica, singer songwriter, fucking amazing guitarist. Like he's like playing the rhythm probably more than like Lars is, but like Lars I think like holds James together if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, their dynamics, still it makes sense why they're still together. I mean, and also he's made me talking shit on both of those drummers. They've also made iconic drum parts, and that's more what I care about than I do like your technical ability, like in any scenario.
Dude, I think that's like I mean a lot of the best stuff is not like the most technical best. It's like yeah,
Yeah.
Even just I think like White Stripes, like Meg White's drumming is not like barn burning, but it's perfect for
Yeah.
like those songs. Like
So kind of